tutorial we're just going to look at the concept of encapsulation in Java, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about using the Java API documentation. So if you're already like a fluent programmer in C++ or something, you'll probably want to skip this tutorial, but this is for you if you don't really understand what the point of public, private and protected is, and that sort of thing. So I've already covered public, private and protected in a previous tutorial, but I actually neglected to mention why we even use these keywords. And let's take an example here. So if you create a class, let's call it plant, and now your class, usually it's going to have some methods and it's going to have some instance variables, and usually your instance variables, for example if I have a string name, you always try to make them private if you can. Now the idea behind encapsulation is that you encapsulate the inner workings of that class within the class. In other words, you stop people outside the class getting at the kind of guts of that class, and you just expose a kind of public API, just some certain methods for people to use outside the class. So if you've got a string name, if you just want to use this in the class, that's fine. And if you want to use it, if you want to let people set it or get to it from outside the class, then we use the getters and setters that you declared, that we saw in a previous tutorial. Getters and setters are methods that let you access this otherwise private data, and of course you can create those by right clicking, going to source, override implement methods. Oh sorry, no, that's the wrong one. And this again we covered in a previous tutorial, but if I go to source, generate getters and setters, and just tick the thing that I want to generate getters and setters for, here we've generated public methods. So these public methods can be used from outside the class, as we saw in the tutorial on public, private and protected. And the idea is I could change this now if I wanted to, and as long as these methods didn't change, then anyone who uses this class wouldn't have to worry about the fact that the inner workings of the class had changed. And that's a large part of the point of encapsulation. If you now sometimes you do make the kind of class data members public, but usually in that case it's only when they are final. So you say like public, and usually they're static as well, public static final, we could call this, I don't know, like ID or something, equals 7. So final means that this can't be changed, and let's make this a int. There we go. So if you do expose a instance variable, well this isn't an instance variable actually, it's just a class variable because it's static, then usually that's just because it's a constant and you just want to be able to say plant.id, but you can't change it from outside the class. If you have a method that's just used by the class itself, let's say you have some public get data method, for example, and that gets you data about your plant. Maybe it returns, who knows, could return a string or some object of some complex class or something. If suppose this uses some kind of method that's only used by the class internally, like we could have a public int get, no, actually maybe let's say calculate growth forecast, something like that. So the idea is that this is not intended to be used outside the class, it's just within the class. I'll just return 9 for the moment to return something. In that case I want to make this private. Again, I want to encapsulate it, prevent people using it from outside. And here I could say, just to complete this, string data equals some stuff, and plus, let's say, calculate growth forecast. So, and let's just return that. Now the idea is that you want to make everything you can private. If you can make it private, make it private. If it needs to be accessible in a child class, then make it protected. And finally, the stuff that you actually want your end user to be able to use, make that public, but try not to make any data public except for constants. So make everything as private as you can, keep everything hidden within the class. And the idea is to reduce, another part of the idea is to reduce cross-linkages in your project. So you don't want one class kind of getting into another class's stuff and using it. And you want to avoid creating a kind of tangled rat's nest. You just want to have a few methods that are defined public and that are clearly documented and that don't change very often, and the rest of the stuff should be kept within the class. So that's the idea behind encapsulation. And as I say, the advantages are that you hide away the implementation details within your class and just provide a public API, application programming interface, in other words, just some public methods. And you also prevent classes being tightly coupled, which means two classes are tightly coupled if they're calling each other stuff all the time, and you don't want that at all, because you'll just create a horrible tangle. So I hope that helps, and I'm just going to show you an example of that now by kind of looking at the Java API. So let's say you want some documentation on a standard Java class. If you go to Google and you say, let's say I want the documentation for the string class, I could type Java 7, which at the moment is the latest version of Java, and string, and hit return. And I can go to the first link here, and here's the API page, and there's the name of the class, there's the package that it's in. This shows you the parent object of string, which in this case is just got one parent object, and I can click on that if I want to see the documentation for object. Here are all the interfaces that the string class implements, and underneath that we see some information about the class, and often you see here examples of using it, which is great. And then when you go down, now these are all the public fields, and you'll notice there's only one bit of public data. So this is like like a class variable, like this thing here. And you'll notice there's as few of them as possible, just one in the case of string, and it's in uppercase, which indicates by convention that it's final. So if I click on that and I go to the full documentation, you can see it's declared as public static final. So you call it via the string class. You'd say string.case in sensitive order, and it's final, meaning it can't be changed. And you only have, if possible, you only expose your class variables if they are final and they're constant. Now underneath of that we've got all the different constructors that a string has, and you can use the different constructors by saying new and then supplying different kinds of parameters in brackets, and that will call up the appropriate constructor for those parameters. And then later on we've got the method summary here, and these methods here, they're not like all the methods that you have in the string class. In fact, these, I think I'm right in saying that these are all the public methods. Just take a look at one. So this is declared public, and the point is that string might use all kinds of protected private methods internally. Actually, I think string doesn't have any protected methods, but I'm sure it has private methods. But when you look at the API, the application programming interface document, you don't want to know about the private methods, because you can't use them and you shouldn't try to use them. You want to know about the methods that are declared public, because that is the public interface of the class. It's the stuff that is designed for public consumption, and that's all these methods here, the methods that you can actually use outside of the string class. And we can also see here some methods inherited from the parent classes. This is one parent class in this case, and if you click on any one of those, it will jump down to like the more detailed information about this, and there's also references to other stuff that you might want to know about. So that's just a brief introduction to encapsulation, which is really a pretty simple idea, and to the API documentation in Java. I hope that helps. And in the next tutorial, we're probably going to look at casting numerical types, and then we're going to go on to look at upcasting, downcasting, and then probably at generics. So join me again next time.